Friend Averroes. Averroes and I were once on the opposite side, but now we're on God's side. And we had, I believe, 3 debates at Arizona State University about the existence of God and other such issues. And several months ago, he was converted to Jesus Christ, and he's going to be telling us how this happened in his life.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Well, my journey obviously begins, as a long time ago. First encounter with Christ was as a child when I told you about the Anglican ministry with him I spoke. But afterwards, it's really after coming to the United States in '97, where the whole thing just starts. I started to study Christianity as a religion. I was a Muslim, and I was a very conservative Muslim. And so my initial beginnings in Christianity were basically mostly from a hostile point of view. However, over time, I came to realize I ended up leaving Islam in 2003, studying Islamic philosophy, Greek philosophy, modern European philosophy, and I came to realize that this was not the religion for me. Jumping forward to, as a matter of fact, last year, I was from then onwards, in 2003 onwards, I was in Arizona, but for the past couple of years, I was in Dallas, in Texas. Over there, I started to go through a transition. Leaving Islam, I had to become a deist, but then afterwards I became an atheist. And but through more reading, introspection, discussing with friends over there, both atheist and theist friends, and attending debates and whatnot, I became a deist again. Once my severe objections, the typical Humean objections against miracles were satisfied, I actually transitioned to becoming a theist.
How did your objections to miracles get satisfied?
Well,
shortly.
Yeah, sure. Quickly, I attended this forum called Dallas Philosophers Forum over there, where a friend of mine who's a Christian, he's a philosopher, a PhD in philosophy, and he presented a paper showing, but in very detail, actually going through a logical progression, why it is reasonable to believe in miracles. And it was basically that argument. The basic gist of it is that if you look at the typical Humean argument, it is that you can't believe in miracles because any other explanation that may be out there is always a better explanation. There can always be some other explanation. The grave was robbed, for instance, and I realized around this time, among other things, having debates and discussions with Christian friends, that whenever I came to the issue of the empty tomb, I will always hypothesize that there's something else that was the explanation. Why? Because miracles don't happen. You can't have miracles. It's a violation of the natural law. So it had to be something else. And I think this is a major hindrance for a lot of people, including those who deny the existence of Jesus, or especially everybody who's not a Christian who denies the resurrection. So if you're able to overcome this natural hesitation that does exist, and I think it's intelligent hesitation, people should not just believe in miracles just because they hear stuff. Because every religion claims a miracle. Yeah. There has to be some good reasons for that. And there, of course, you have Habermas, you have Dr. William Lane Craig and others, and many other people who can show there's good reasons to believe why the early Christians, they believed that this actually happened in their lives, as good testimony as you can get from history. But most people don't find that reliable because they don't want to believe in miracles. So again, if my objection against humanism was satisfied by the paper, and then I became open to accepting this as a possibility, and then over time I did accept it.
You came open to accepting not just miracles, but that the resurrection.
Well, I did see, I was familiar with the evidence of resurrection, and then I re-examined it after my openness to miracles. And so this is my transition to theism, where I believe in a personal God who actually also is providentially working within history. And how you can see that in the Old Testament, there's a narration from Genesis all the way to Malachi. There is this, this new covenant is coming. The old covenant is not working properly, and there's a promise of this Messiah. But in the New Testament, you see the same thing happening, and we are part of that history, the New Testament history, starting from Jesus, end of the temple period in 70 AD, and then from there onwards, God is working in our history. And I saw that God's working in the Christian world, in the Western civilization at large, is part of divine providence, where things have happened, great things have happened in the world. And even from the abolition to slavery, to women's rights, arguments against imperialism, colonialism, these are arguments. Europe had its empires and its colonies as any other empire in the past human history. But arguments against such activities, arguments for fundamental human rights, these ideas came from a Christian milieu in Europe, and in a particular kind of Christianity, obviously, because there were other Christians who may oppose these things. So I do see God working in history as He currently is. So I see divine providence very imminently in the world, and
So then, how did you move from theism to becoming a Christian?
Well, once I came to realize that God is personally involved in history and how He's working in the Western world, I was very concerned with the fate of the Western world as it is right now. Mostly as how becoming disillusioned with secular progressives and seeing that they will not be able to save the precious things in the West. I used to think that the Greeks were these great people, and then Romans not so great. By the time you get to Christianity, you have the Dark Ages, and only after, this is my atheist talk. Then it's after Reformation, the breakup of the church monopoly. You get Renaissance, you get the Greeks back, and then Enlightenment, 18th century. That was the greatest thing that ever happened, right? And so we had all this great stuff. This was my idea. So I would just take away the Christian era. What I came to realize is that this is actually this is kind of sort of a false idea. Even I think Gibbons also kind of presents it this way. He talks about the Dark Ages coming. In other words, this is something the secularists like to believe. But the fact is that we have to recognize that it was actually in a very unique Christian setting. Now, I will say, of course, that the Christians, I do believe that Christianity is not just the fulfillment of the Old Testament law, but also perfection of the Platonic philosophy. We talked about this at ASU. And so clearly the rediscovery of the Greeks was an important component of that. But within that, once those fundamental, the spark was ignited around the 15th, 16th century, end of the Middle Ages, you see a reinvigoration of the Christian, value system, the idea of, truth and love, both working in harmony. Then Christians come up with these ideas about, again, well, slavery is obviously accepted in the Bible, and yet they're arguing against slavery. Well, how are they doing this thing? They only do this because they have the idea of what actually radical concept of love personified in Jesus Christ. They understood this meaning, and this was not divorced from truth. This goes back to, from Copernicus to Galileo to Isaac Newton to everybody else, all the way to 20th century scientists who all believed in the pursuit of truth, and they believed it as part of their belief in God. So all of this working together, seeing this as being God's divine providence, and how the secular value system is rejecting this, all of this. It's rejecting Christianity, it's also rejecting the achievements of the Western world that were achieved by Christian Europeans. I mean, we are talking about Christian Europeans over here. And so that worry was always there, because I am, a big, supporter of the West as being intellectually and morally superior to other civilizations. And so I started seeing how this was basically part of a Christian worldview, a different worldview than some other Christians that they might have, but definitely a Christian worldview, and this has to be preserved. So coming to Arizona, among other things, I was trying to, as I said, perfect myself in some moral capacity. And what I decided this in Dallas, that I was going to live a life like Thoreau, of very minimalism, and trying to rid myself of some, materialistic tendencies that people have, desires. Not that there's anything wrong with material accumulation, but, just be more simplistic. After coming here, I got a job, but I deliberately became homeless for about, I was about a month or so. And I tried to live a life out of my car, and it was in end of July, beginning of August. Worst time being in Phoenix, 110-degree temperatures, 100 degrees at nighttime. But I was working at the airport, and there was a chapel over there, and I started to go there and start praying over there. In that process, in those times, I had this romantic idea of what it would be. I would be sitting on mountains, reading books, meditating, and, doing all this good stuff, like a philosopher or something. But instead, of course, my priorities changed. I was more worried about where am I going to, sleep next? How am I going to change my clothes, and where am I going to laundry them? Things that you don't worry about, right? Normally in life, which is expected. Of course, you're trying to live a homeless life. And in that process, I came to realize I'm trying to perfect myself in some way, right? I'm trying to be this moral person, and to what end? What is the goal for this? And that's where I realized, look, this idea of perfection by these means does not make any sense. It is not how you become perfect. You only become perfect by one thing, and that is by love. I had started to read the Gospels again from a new light. I started to see how what Jesus talks about, what Paul talks about, is this idea of love. This idea of sacrificial love. Love God with your all your mind, your heart, your strength, your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Even love your enemy. And the funny thing is that the second command to love your neighbor is not a second command, in my opinion. It's just part of the first command to love God, because God loves everybody else. God is love. He is always eternally be focused upon others. So just by loving this one God who loves other, well, that is what your nature becomes. Once I came to realize this in my prayers, I eventually bowed down and prayed to Jesus, and I accepted Him as my Lord and Savior. And I did say this, that I actually, at that time, I considered Him, I was a Unitarian, I just considered Him to be a great man. So Lord just meant that He was my Master and Savior, in the sense that that I did believe in the redemption and His resurrection. So
You believed in the death and resurrection.
yes, so hence I accepted Him as being the source of my salvation, and my Lord, as in terms of, this is the guy I want to follow. It was a few weeks after my conversion, in that sense, that I came to recognize the divinity of Christ.
Had you been thinking a long time about submitting to Jesus?
No, I wasn't. That's the funny thing. I wasn't.
Did you
really.
suddenly read something in the Bible, or God just touched you in prayer?
Well, it's funny actually. After coming to Arizona, I did, tell some of my friends about the fact that I do find Jesus incredible, and I think that resurrection may have actually happened. But I had problems with converting to Christianity. I had developed this whole system of philosophy, systematic skepticism, and this had become sort of part of my life mission, was so to promulgate that as a way upholding certain values that I think are morally intelligible, that you could believe those things, and you don't have to have the supernatural ideas. I mean, supernaturalism wasn't really so I had a problem with it as such. Once I came to believe in a theistic God, I said, okay, well, I mean, I think it was a very quick run from there to Jesus, but conversion, and I thought of conversion as such, but not really strongly. One day I just decided, I will pray to Jesus. I had prayed to Jesus in the past too, because Christians had asked me, and it really didn't mean much, but I was ready, and I did. And that was a very transformative experience for me. I knew then that, look, there is no way that I will change my belief in the supremacy of His message and what He had done for us. So, and I said again, I was not a Trinitarian Christian back then, but it was a sort of somewhat of a radical transformation, I would say.
What happened to you exactly?
Well, I won't say anything special. I mean, it was a feeling that that the way I'm trying to perfect myself morally it started to feel superficial. I realized, I mean, so I'm trying to be homeless or be more minimalistic, and yet other worries of life are taking over what the other things that I was substituting one worry for the other. It wasn't really in any way leading towards any kind of enlightenment, so to speak, right? If that may be a goal, and yet I realized that this is where when I have a different interpretation of what Paul talks about in Romans. He says, through law, the knowledge of sin comes to us. And he talks about there's the Jewish law, obviously, but there's also the law that exists in the heart of the Gentiles, the Greeks particularly. They understand the moral law. Torah also meaning instructions, right? These are all moral instructions. And you can wrap your hand, and I'm a moral realist, so I do believe that you can know right and wrong, through reason. But you can wrap your head all around it, and nothing really happens. Unless, of course, your heart transforms. Interestingly, heart transformation actually requires not abstract thought, although that's part of it. It requires concrete personal examples. This is how we change people. Children, when they grow up in a family, seeing their parents, or when people convert from one religion to the other, or leave theism for atheism or atheism for theism, they're looking at examples which basically make them feel either they belong to somebody or some group or not. And it is through that heart transformation that we actually are saved. So when I started seeing it from that perspective, I realized that that my entire intellectual endeavor, while necessary, was not sufficient for salvation.
I see. Then can you explain, you touched in the debate on how you were arguing against the writings of the Apostle Paul and saying
Oh,
that he
yeah.
contradicted himself.
Yeah, there was
From Romans 15, was it?
no, that was from comparison of Galatians, and so in Acts, there's I think it's Acts 21. I'm not sure, 17:21. He goes back to Jerusalem. James calls him over there, and he says, "Look, people are saying you're blaspheming against Moses, which means against the law."
Yeah.
And then Paul says, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm not saying anything against the law." And then James asks him to go through this procedure where these other Christians were going through, and it was a kind of a repenting procedure or whatever it was, but Paul takes part of it. So he takes part in the Jewish legal rights in Jerusalem. In Galatians, of course, he's arguing and he says he chastises Peter, saying, "Hey, look, you used to eat with Gentiles, and then these Judaizers come from Jerusalem, and now you're eating with them, right?" So the way I took it was like he was telling Peter, like, "Look, you should be eating with the Gentiles." And so the point was that, in my opinion, he had basically blasphemed against the law in that sense. He was telling Peter, "Look, you were eating with these people, and now you're not eating, so you're being a hypocrite over here." He's not telling Peter to obey the law. He's simply calling out his hypocrisy. Whereas, of course, in Acts early on, there was a compromise where the Jewish Christians will follow the law, the Gentile Christians will not have to follow the law, except for 3 or 4 commandments that are given. So this is my argument that I often made against a lot of Christians. And that day when I was actually one of these speeches given by Dr. William Lane Craig at the Bible Beer Consortium in Dallas, I wanted to present this case to him. I was among other things, I had become a sort of transition to theism, and I was trying to prepare this case. I was reading the Bible, and it seems silly in hindsight because it seems so obvious to me now, but it took me 3 or 4 years to finally get to the point where I looked at it and realized that, well, I was reading it wrong entirely. Paul is not saying, he was telling Peter that yes, he was acting like a hypocrite, but he was not telling Peter to not follow the law. Paul's mission was, he was an apostle to the Gentiles, and he did say, "Look, we are not saved by the law, we are saved by the grace of God and the love of God." But when you have a guy, Peter makes the same argument in Jerusalem before the compromise, saying, "Look, on the issue of circumcision, it's like it's difficult for us to keep the laws, so why should we have the Gentiles keep it?" Same argument is made by Paul. It's like, "Look, here's these people who are coming and he's telling these Jews, these Christians, Gentile Christians, you need to keep the laws or have these tables separated, and some A is going to eat like this and B is going to eat like that." It creates diffraction. And he's telling Peter, and he's reminding his writers in Galatia in the context by saying, "Look, following the law is not what is a necessary part of Christian salvation. It does not mean that Jews should not keep that law, Jewish Christians." And I do believe, of course, that this was a requirement for Jewish Christians up till 70 AD. After as Olivet Discourse, Jesus does prophesy that it was, actually the destruction of the temple, but also before he says in Matthew that the letter of the Lord law would disappear until the end of heaven and earth. All these things come to pass. Those things were the destruction of the temple, the temple-centered Judaism. It ended, and from then onwards, even Jewish Christians, I would argue, are not under the law. Up till that point, they were under the law. And no, Paul was not saying that Jewish Christians should not keep the law, which is why he did keep the law when asked for by James in Jerusalem. He was not being... So my legalistic argument of showing that how Paul may have lied about his testimony, so maybe some of his other claims are not exactly trustworthy. It was a fool's errand.
It seems to me Paul's disparaging arguments against the law deal with the rites and the rituals of Judaism,
right?
The ceremonial law, not the moral law.
Yeah, sure, absolutely right. So the moral law is still. He says this at the end of chapter 3 of Romans. He says, so what about the law? Are we then therefore not to, well, there's no boasting in the law. The boast is only in faith. But are we to then reject the law? No. Instead, we uphold the law. So yes, so the moral precepts, the fundamental moral precepts, and Paul even lists them quite a lot. Jesus lists a lot of them, 6 particular ones in the Sermon on the Mount, and other things which are all incumbent upon Christians. But the important thing is that we will always interpret the moral instructions in light of God's idea of love. I think sometimes Christians kind of overlook that.
Yeah, but on your Facebook page you had written the gospel in 300 words.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Sure.
I know, not word for word, but
Yeah.
if you would,
Briefly, yeah.
how to witness.
I will not witness it that way, because it's a bit more convoluted. I'll try to make it more simpler. But what I did say was that if you believe it's reasonable to believe in God, or at the very least, it is not unreasonable to believe in God. So there's an aesthetic reason to believe in it. If you believe God is personal, and that He's perfect, then it necessarily implies that He's morally perfect, that He's also therefore perfect in love. If God is perfect in love, then the difference between the God of, let's just say, Islam and Judaism versus the God of Christianity is that if the God of Islam or Judaism loves us before creation, He only potentially loved us, because we did not exist as actual beings to love. Like, I believe I could be a loving father, but at this moment, because I have no children, I am potentially a loving father until I have children, and then I will be a loving father. But in Christianity, what we are told is from the very beginning, there was the monogenes, the only begotten Son of God, that there was always the second, the other, in the divine being. So, I mean, of course, you get the third, but it's not the same person. In the beginning, there were two, and that, I mean, in an eternal sense. And so there was always the other focus. So at the very beginning, the Father was logically preceding the Son. So the Son, the concept Father and Son are these predicates, these qualities you have, right? One proceeding from the other, but they're both co-eternal. And for eternity, God was in love because He was in other relationship, other focus, not just self-focus. It is God-focused, yes, because this is whole God being, but it's somebody else. Swinburne makes a similar argument, Richard Swinburne, but and he tries to proceed that into the argument for the whole Trinity as such. I don't think that argument follows completely, but the very basis we do know that there was another being in the divine.
Mm-hmm.
That being, the Son, of course, then later on in history manifests Himself. If you believe that God is other loving, then you should actually expect that sooner or later God will do something like this. My personal project in life, as I see my calling, is to therefore also develop this idea where you can, aside from the historicity of Jesus and the historicity of the resurrection, that we can develop a good metaphysical scheme that can rationally, independent of the scriptures, support the scriptural claim.
Mm-hmm.
Why God had to be a plural being, and B, why as a concept of what love as taught in Christianity, He would have sooner or later, incarnated on earth and shown and lived amongst us.
That's great. Yeah.